You're listening to the Monocle Daily, first broadcast on the 28th of February 2025 on Monocle Radio.
Is Europe really ready to rearm? Are Europeans likely to vote for it? And are pearls overdue a comeback? I'm Andrew Muller. The Monocle Daily starts now. Hello and welcome to the Monocle Daily, coming to you from our studios here at Midori House in London. I'm Andrew Muller. It's Friday, so it's our weekly in-house daily, and the Monocle staffers who believed that there was a dog in the studio are Chris Chermak, Anita Ryota, Alexa Self and Brenda Tui. They'll discuss the day's stuff, plus we'll meet the curator of a new exhibition celebrating the life and works of Leigh Bowery, and we'll have our weekly wrap-up of what we've learned. Stay tuned, all that and more coming up right here on the Monocle Daily. This is the Monocle Daily. I'm Andrew Muller. It is 2 weeks since US Vice President J.D. Vance addressed the Munich Security Conference and hinted heavily that the United States was decreasingly interested in subsidizing the defense of an indolent Europe. This sowed an amount of panic across the continent, prompting several European countries to make spectacular promises about defense spending. For more on this, I spoke a short while ago to Monocle's senior news editor Chris Chermak, Monocle's foreign editor Alexa Self and foreign desk producer Anita Ryota. I began by asking Chris if Germany is ready to get over the last 80 years or so and become a serious military power again.
I do actually think there is some chance of that changing. And the way to put that is you did have 3 years ago Olaf Scholz, the current chancellor, trying to usher in that change with his famous Zeitenwende speech that was saying that Germany was now ready to up its defense spending. And while he fell somewhat flat in that effort, it is now being taken up by the chancellor in waiting, that being Friedrich Merz. And I do think that by comparison, he is somebody who is relatively serious about it and will try to stick with this. You're already seeing this in Germany. Even before the coalition negotiations get started, he actually wants to launch a new fund of 200 billion for German defense. That's something he wants to get through the current parliament before he is even the chancellor and has reached a coalition deal with the Social Democrats or anyone else as he goes about that. So he has talked about this being absolutely his top priority. He said that immediately on Sunday night after the elections. Obviously, this is Germany. Whether it's ever going to actually work is an open question, but he is more serious about it than most have been.
Lex, more or less contemporaneously, we did hear from Sir Keir Starmer, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, talking about ramping up UK defence spending at an accelerated rate of knots and rather regrettably gutting international aid to raise the money to do that. Is that an easier sell, though, to the British than it might be to the German people? The United Kingdom does enjoy patting itself on the back for a long history of martial valour. Do you get the sense that the British voters are up for being a serious leading military power again?
Well, I think part of what the past few weeks has taught Europe and the UK in particular is that assumptions around our defence capabilities have been found wanting. Lots of figures and kind of analogies going around in the UK over the past few weeks. The big and most shocking one is that the British Army, which, as you said, has this great history of having, in the popular imagination, almost never lost a war, would actually, in its current form, fit entirely into Wembley Stadium, the big football stadium in London. I think that need not be as terrifying as people are talking about it as though it is. I think the thing about Europe getting real on defence and really taking it seriously is coordinating to the extent that different countries play to their strengths. You don't want everyone focusing on the army when the threat is hybrid from Russia, But yeah, I think it's been a huge awakening. And to have the UK's closest ally, or what was perceived to be closest ally, the US, pulling the rug from under its feet, as it were, in that regard, has been terrifying. And, people talking about the UK, again, part of its kind of self-importance is derived from the fact that it's a nuclear power. But the fact is that the UK's nuclear deterrent, Trident, is supplied by the US. So, there's also been talks about whether we can rely on the US to resupply Trident in those circumstances.
Anita, how does this look in Italy now? Because Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni surprised a lot of people, by and large pleasantly, by being really pretty rock solid on Ukraine, which is not something that you could say about all of the right to far right tendency in Italy. Are we seeing, I guess congruent with that, an equal focus on replenishing Italy's defence forces?
Absolutely. And this starts even a few years ago. Since 2021, 2022, Italy has seen a giant leap in the amount of arms that it exports to other countries. It's now the 6th largest arms exporter in the world. But on top of just manufacturing arms, she really is placing a big onus on Europe stepping up its defense spending. She backed Ursula von der Leyen's call this week to remove defense spending from the EU Stability Pact, which limits government spending based on how much they are indebted. Right now, though, Rome is projecting that its defense spending will hit 1.6% by 2027. That's obviously less than the 2% NATO target now, and it's nowhere near the 5% target that Donald Trump wants that NATO spending to be. So the bridge between 1.6 and 5, it's pretty hard to see, even with all the emphasis that they've put on being able to manufacture arms within Italy. It's hard to see how they're going to make up that gap, especially when you consider that the threat of tariffs from the U.S. is ever present and really could be slapped at any moment. So how is that industry impacted? I'm not really sure.
The thing being, Chris, a thing being here is that however much money a given country wants to spend on its defence force, it is going to be reliant on people, its own citizens, being willing to step up and wear its uniform, absent the reintroduction of conscription, which is, I know, a conversation happening across Europe as well. But in Germany in particular, I have heard complaint more than once that part of, and this complaint has come from non-German militaries, that part of the problem the post-war German military has is that, for obvious reasons, it's not really regarded as an entirely respectable career. Is that still a problem?
It absolutely is a problem that you've also seen already under the current Chancellor Olaf Scholz. Part of his effort to change how things were going was to increase the numbers in the German military, and that is where he has really struggled, if not, more than the financing aspect of this. And this is something that I certainly, in my time living in Germany, can tell you I experienced. I did stories on the Bundeswehr when they were trying, even 10 years ago, to kind of raise their profile. They had a sort of welcome place in Berlin where they were trying to recruit soldiers, and they talked about the difficulties of that. They said it was extremely the way they were perceived. One of the soldiers told me that, the only place where he got some recognition was in the US at an airport where somebody thanked him for his service. That would never happen in Germany. You might be seeing a little bit of a change now, I think, certainly because of Ukraine, as we've been talking about here. Certainly there is a recognition in the German public as well that things do need to change. For me, maybe one of the most interesting examples of that is the Greens, right? You've had this party that was once the pacifist anti-war party. Now you have Robert Habeck, the leader of the Greens, campaigning in this election. To Anita's point about numbers, he wants German defense spending to be up at 3.5%, and it's currently, they've just about passed the 2% mark because of Olaf Scholz's spending. So that is a sign that there are groups that are talking about this, but then there's also resistance. The far right in the German case is against all of this. The far left also says we don't see why we need to spend this much on defense. So it is a very mixed bag at the moment in Germany, whether it's the money or the people that they need.
There is this idea that Ukraine is fighting Russia on behalf of all of us. Is it seen that way in Italy, or has Italy managed to see it as, I think, quite a few, well, I say quite a few Mediterranean countries, there's actually not that many of them, but certainly Spain's attitude has always been that it is, to quote Neville Chamberlain, the struggle in a faraway country of which we know nothing. Has it been pitched by Meloni to Italy as this is actually our problem?
I definitely think so. And I think that, as you mentioned at the beginning, her support for Ukraine has really been staunch and consistent. I think that she is seeing this as a moment about whether Europe as a bloc, the EU as a bloc, rises to the challenge. And I do think that she sees that if the war continues to spread, that it's coming to Rome, to the West, to the Mediterranean countries. And I think you can see that because of the quote unquote solutions that she is offering. She wants to use EU common debt to fund defense spending. She wants to create a sort of joint military budget. Those are really big proposals. Even 6 months ago, that would have been, the EU has had conversations about creating a common debt or using common debt for a lot of different things. Really, the only time that's successfully been pulled off is the COVID, or in recent times, the COVID pandemic relief fund, which Italy is a giant beneficiary of. So, maybe that is part of what fuels her support of initiatives like that. But she really is trying to make it a continent-wide problem. And I do think you see that she just met with the Swedish PM. She's going to meet Keir Starmer soon. So within and beyond the EU, she clearly is seeing this as something that if the bloc as a whole doesn't act jointly, then moving alone just won't work.
That was Anita Riota, Chris Cermak and Alexa Self. You are listening to The Daily. You're listening to The Daily on Monocle Radio. On a newsstand near you shortly is the new issue of Monocle's sister publication, Konfekt. It contains at least one article about pearls. And here to explain why is the writer thereof, Monocle's luxury markets editor, Brenda Toohey. Brenda, welcome to The Daily.
Thanks, Andrew. Very happy to be here and to talk about pearls.
Okay, well, I think that's telegraphed the item nicely. Pearls are not exactly a new thing. They have been around for some considerable while, is my understanding. Why are we making a thing of them now?
I think that certain jewelers have reimagined pearls. Tasaki, Mikimoto, Shomei, and even Pharrell Williams' collection for Tiffany & Co. So they've taken an entirely modern and in some cases minimalist design ethos and sort of turned the pearl world on its head.
Although you wouldn't be able to tell because they are essentially spherical. Why did pearls need reimagining, though? I mean, is it the case that basically Margaret Thatcher ruined them for generations?
Well, maybe. Maybe. I think that pearls had a sort of a difficult run. They were incredibly sought after, let's say, from 1900 to, 1920s. You couldn't get enough pearls. People were crazy for pearls. And then there was the Wall Street crash, and they sort of fell out of favor when a couple of years earlier, clever Japanese entrepreneurs like Mikimoto created a cultured pearl. So then one was essentially unable to tell the difference between a natural pearl and a cultured pearl. So many pearls flooded the market, and therefore, they weren't held in as high regard as they had been. However, as I've mentioned, these very clever jewelers have just changed the landscape of pearls and made them look entirely desirable, modern, avant-garde even.
How are they doing that, though? I mean, I realise this is difficult to communicate without visual aids, but as I alluded to before by invoking Margaret Thatcher, I think for a lot of people the pearl has a certain image. These are things that people's aunts of a certain age used to wear to church. Is this what they are trying to get away from?
100% trying to get away from. Tasaki, for example, have mounted the pearls on a single golden bar. So 5 pearls mounted horizontally on a single golden bar, which is attached to a ring. You can wear it on any finger you like, but it really looks cool and different. And they've done it with white pearls and also with black pearls. Pearls, as you know, aren't always spherical. They can also be Baroque. And
now we're splitting hairs, but go on.
And Baroque pearls take on a more pear-like shape, and they're they're, they have little nubbles and different things. They're not entirely smooth. Just FYI, Andrew.
Is there any snobbery, though, attached to the difference between cultured and non-cultured pearls? Is that still a thing? Your listeners, she is nodding solemnly.
100%. Now that we are able to X-ray pearls, we can absolutely tell the difference between a cultured pearl and a natural pearl. And in a natural pearl, you will find a nucleus. In a cultured pearl, you won't. So natural pearls are prized. They are, basically it's been overfished. They're kind of gone. I think maybe in Bahrain, because they have protected their pearl farms, you might be able to find natural pearls there. But otherwise, I think you'd have to go to an auction house where they would have pearls from the secondary market that are indeed natural and also incredibly valuable.
So, by which you mean expensive. These new designers you're talking about doing new and exciting things with pearls, are they at all constrained or bothered by that stratification between natural and cultured? Are they just ploughing ahead with the cultured pearls?
They just plough ahead with the cultured pearls. They couldn't really get their hands probably on natural pearls in that sort of entry-level market. I'm sure when we're talking about haute jewelry, the pearls are entirely natural, but that's on a fantastical scale of cost and design.
What has become, though, just finally, of those pieces which may have been made in days of yore of natural pearls? I know you have an interest in the vintage jewellery market. Is there any cachet attached to those old pieces that people's aunts of a certain age might actually have worn to church, or are they all going to be stripped for parts and remade into something new and flashy?
You could do that, or you could just be brave and pop a string of pearls on with a white T-shirt and a denim jacket, maybe even double denim. I don't know. But you could. Why not?
Double denim and white pearls. You heard it here first, folks. This summer, it's what they'll all be wearing. Brenda Toohey, to bring us back to what is, if we're honest, the point of this item, when is the new edition of Konfekt actually out?
Konfekt Spring will be on the newsstands on the 20th of March.
Brenda Toohey, thank you for joining us. You're listening to The Daily on Monocle Radio. The late performance artist Leigh Bowery was born in Australia, but he is inextricable from the seedy, vibrant streets of London Soho in the 1980s. It was there that Bowery, in outlandish costumes of latex and sequins and lashings of makeup, made a name for himself. Always pushing boundaries, often outrageous, he was a chameleon with an ever-changing look and a roster of personas, performer, fashion designer and model among them. A new exhibition at London's Tate Modern celebrates his tragically short but extraordinary life and his artistic legacy since his death in 1994. Monocle's Sophie Monaghan-Coombs spoke to co-curator Fintan Moran. Amidst a bustling gallery, she began by asking him a very, very difficult question. How does one describe Leigh Bowery?
Well, it is kind of a difficult question because Leigh is someone who refused classification because he was a fashion designer, he was a club promoter, he was a performer. But essentially, we're at Tate Modern, he was an artist. And Tate Modern is a space that enables you to show a broad range of artistic practices. And Leigh really kind of embodies that kind of approach.
And you've got so many of those different kind of artistic practices on display here. There's sort of everything. There's lots of collaborators. It's really kind of all-encompassing show. What was the curation experience like?
I mean, it was a dream show to work on, but also challenging because Leigh is a figure who knew and collaborated with loads of people. And so you can't really do a show about Leigh without having Lucian Freud, Michael Clark, Rachel Orban. And so in the process of curating the show, we started to think about, actually the environments in which he's doing all the things he's doing. And so that's why each room is based around a location. You start in the home, then you go to the club, then you go to the theatre, then you go on the street. And so hopefully through that process, you get a sense of his work within the time and the context that they were originally showing. And then through that, you also get a sense of the ideas that he's exploring and how they transform and change over time.
You've just taken us on a very good tour of the show. You started off by saying something really beautiful about sequins, and we're stood right by this big sequin wall, which, you said something lovely about how they both reflect the people around you, but also kind of draw attention to yourself. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that idea and also some of the sort of costumes and community building that's part of this show.
Leigh, a lot of Leigh's costumes involved a lot of sequins, especially in the mid-80s going into around 1990. And I thought, he liked sequins because when he's in a club, they obviously shine and reflect and he gets more attention. But I think equally, there's something that reflects the world around him, and we kind of wanted to use Leigh as a way to talk really about a dynamic community within London, especially in the 80s and 90s. And the show is very much almost like a community project, and it was really amazing getting to meet so many of the people that knew Leigh. And despite him being, sometimes a challenging friend and very provocative, you could see how much joy he brought to their lives and how much he's missed. And so the show is as much a commemoration of their relationships as it is around the ideas that Leigh was exploring.
We're obviously at the Tate Modern in the centre of London, and Leigh was originally from Australia, but a lot of the show is based in London. There's a lot about Soho. I wonder what putting this show together sort of taught you about the city or showed you about the city.
Yeah, I actually, because I'm a geek, I actually made a Google map of all the sites that I came across related to Leigh. It's interesting because at that time, most of club culture or the places you would go out in were in central London, and obviously now that's very different. But Leigh lived in East London in Shadwell, and so it was interesting to think about how the city has changed so dramatically since that time period, but also how there are still obviously experimental club nights and subcultures going on. It hasn't disappeared, and with the exhibition I wanted to kind of think about kind of create a kind of a love poem or something to the city that I think, despite challenges, is still a thriving creative space. And it kind of was a nice reminder of the fact that Soho used to be this kind of dark, dirty, mysterious place that I think still kind of existed when I was 18, but I think has slightly disappeared now.
Starting and ending with difficult questions, how do you think, having put this show together, being, completely immersed in the world of Leigh Bowery for such a long time, how do you think about his legacy now?
A lot of people talk about Leigh's legacy in relation to fashion design because it's probably the most, because he made garments, he used makeup to transform himself, and so you can see the influence. But I think for me, after working the show, I think his biggest legacy is actually challenging and pushing things to extremes and really not really giving a damn about what anyone might think. And I hope that anyone who comes to the show, whether you leave liking or disliking Leigh, because he was a provocative character, you hopefully get a sense of someone who really wanted to resist any form of conformity. And I think within a contemporary landscape where people growing up are kind of expected to have their own personal brand or know exactly what they want to do, is really inspiring.
That was Monocle's Sophie Monaghan-Coombs speaking to curator Fintan Moran on the new exhibition Leigh Bowery, ! Which is open until the end of August at London's Tate Modern. You are listening to The Daily with me, Andrew Muller. And finally, on today's show, our weekly assessment of how much wiser the last 7 days have left us. We learned this week of exciting new career prospects for the grievously oppressed and disregarded demographic. That is, cranky middle-aged white guys with podcasts. For we learned that the new deputy director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation is this guy.
Why does everybody want to fight me all the time? Do I have a punchable face or something?
This guy being specifically host of the Dan Bongino show, Dan Bongino. We learned from a brief survey of his CV that while Bongino has been, in fairness, a New York City police officer and a Secret Service agent, he has no experience at all whatsoever of the organisation of which he is now second in command. So on balance, it's reassuring that the ultimate responsibility for the FBI is now in the steady, capable hands lines of,
"We will go out and find the conspirators, not just in government, but in the media. Yes, we're going to come after the people in the media who lied about American citizens, who helped Joe Biden rig presidential elections."
America. It was fun while it lasted. On which subject we learned more of US President Donald Trump's sane, plausible, and above all extremely normal vision for post-war Gaza, and we learned this from a video the actual President of the United Actual States posted on his own account on his own platform.
Donald's coming to set you free, bringing the light for all to see. No more tunnels, no more fear. Trump Gaza is finally here.
We are honestly uncertain whether we can, in all good conscience, recommend that listeners look up the accompanying AI-generated animation of the Mediterranean resort of Trump's fevered imaginings, but we are able to confirm that it includes such vignettes as...
A brand new life. Feast and dance, the deal is done. Trump Gaza, #1.
Bearded bikini-clad belly dancers, children dancing in showers of banknotes, a grateful urchin flying a gold balloon in the shape of Trump's head, though the balloon possibly contains more, a huge gold statue of Trump and racks of smaller souvenirs of the huge gold statue, a shirtless Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu lounging on deck chairs, and someone who looks very like Elon Musk eating hummus. We are continuing to learn, basically, that satirizing current American politics has become pretty much a matter of merely reciting what actually happens, and sticking with that theme. We learned that it was, again, that glorious time of year at which compilers of whimsical weekly news reviews can put their feet up, while the annual Dingbat Rodeo, which trades as the Conservative Political Action Conference, pretty much writes it all for us.
Oh no.
We learned first of all of the caliber of overseas guest that this forum is able to attract. No less a keynote speaker than Liz Truss.
No, Liz who?
No, doesn't ring any bells.
Elizabeth, maybe? What's your bugs face?
That's showbiz. We learned from the UK's shortest serving and yet not serving nearly shortly enough Prime Minister that she, for one, and very possibly for only, had seen something she'd like to bring back home. Although if we had access to a lifelong taxpayer-funded expense account of up to 115 grand a year on the basis of 7 weeks service, we'd be a bit circumspect about encouraging ruthless purges of unnecessary state spending. Still, we learned from CPAC of the imminent rescue of possibly the only cohort of people more brutally downtrodden than cranky middle-aged white guys with podcasts, i.e. younger white guys who like to tell jokes and drink beer with their friends. And we learned this from Vice President J.D. Vance, who was totally telling jokes and drinking beer with his very, very many friends, which he definitely has, both before and after making this important intervention.
My message to young men is don't allow this broken culture to send you a message that you're a bad person because you're a man, because you like to tell a joke, because you like to have a beer with your friends.
We shall overcome, Mr. Vice President. We shall. But what we mostly gleaned from CPAC was further insight into the thinking of the person who is increasingly obviously actually running the United States, i.e. hopefully first man on Mars sooner rather than later Elon Musk, and let's hear it if you're old enough to remember when the Republican Party was just furious about the idea of a foreign-born billionaire influencing American politics when they thought it was George Soros.
I think so.
We learned from Musk, as he wore a baseball cap and sunglasses indoors, as serious and sober adults so very often do, that...
It was essentially to buy freedom of expression.
But we learned that Musk may have been distracted, certainly if he gets push alerts on his phone. For we learned that he had caused an email to be sent to hundreds of thousands of federal government employees demanding to know in bullet point form what they did last week. So we learned, or at least very much hope to learn, that whatever Elon Musk has or has not accomplished this week, or indeed does or does not accomplish with his time on this planet, he has surely set an all-time world record for receiving the most emails consisting of the words, "Your mum." And that's all for this edition of the Monocle Daily. Thanks to our slew of in-house contributors. Today's show was produced by Anita Riota and researched by Maisie Ringer. Our sound engineer was Steph Chungu. I'm Andrew Muller here in London. The Daily is back at the same time on Monday. Thanks for listening and have a great weekend.